to solve the problem, solve the conflict, it's really important to touch the cause of the conflict. So it means that we need to understand what is the conflicting actor think, to understand what they are thinking and to have some good relationship and trust building with all actors. That is a starting point. Then we can start to think together what is the future.
This is SPF World Views, and that was Dr. Akiko Horiba, Director of SPF Center for Mediation Support. While global attention tends to focus on large-scale wars in places like Ukraine and Gaza, many other violent conflicts, often rooted in unresolved struggles over self-determination, continue largely out of sight. On this episode of SPF World Views, we explore what it takes to pursue peace in this global moment. Our guest, Dr. Horiba, draws on decades of field experience to discuss the concept of peace mediation support, Japan's potential role, and why lasting peace depends on addressing the root causes of conflict. This conversation is especially timely with the April 1st launch of SPF Center for Mediation Support, which aims to strengthen Japan's efforts to support peace processes across Asia and beyond. At a time when military approaches dominate, this conversation offers a grounded perspective on the continued importance of dialogue, trust building, and inclusive engagement. This interview was recorded on February 26, 2026. Horiba-san, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Today, we'll be discussing a broad range of topics from the concepts of peace building and peace mediation support.
Yes.
But before we get to that, I think we need to ground ourselves in terms of where we are in the world looking toward conflicts that are happening today. So this is a bit of a big question, but I wanted to ask from your perspective how you would characterize the state of conflict today.
Thank you very much, Jackie. In this world right now, there are so many conflicts. People are still very much suffering all over the world, but media covered those conflicts. For example, what I'm involving in southern Thailand, there are a lot of bombs still bombing, but on the local media even, not so much covered those issues in the region too. And for example, Rohingya issues or Myanmar issues, there are still conflicts going, but because of the big conflict in Gaza, Russia, Ukrainian, so no one care about those conflicts. But statistically, more than 50% of the conflict in the world related to self-determination conflict.
Can you just quickly tell us what do you mean by self-determination conflict?
Self-determination conflict is the demand of the right of self-determination, but because of the strong government or authoritarian government, pressure to the local people, especially using the violence and oppressed those people's demand. So they cannot really fully get their right of the self-determination. So they just grab the arms and they fight back to the government. But the government also oppress those people's demand. So it is a negative cycle of the violence. That kind of conflict still occurs in many countries. But because of the big war, Russia, Ukraine, Gaza, Syria, Yemen, Libya, self-determination conflict is ignored. But that also leads to other conflict. So I think it is very important to focusing on and try to solve those problems in the self-determination conflict.
We'll be going into the concepts of peace building and peace mediation. But to an untrained ear like mine, the words peace building, peace mediation, and also peace mediation support all sound vaguely similar to each other. So I'm hoping you could explain what exactly is the distinction between these phrases.
Yes. Actually, at the UN level, there is a definition of peace building. It's very broad definition of peace building. And then there are four phases: preventive diplomacy, peacemaking, peacekeeping, and post-conflict peace building. And Japanese government and Japanese NGOs mainly focus on the post-conflict peace building. So it means that there is a peace agreement, then Japanese entity come in for the development, reconstruction, and so on. So in the post-conflict reconstruction, mean that we are using ODA, then development aid. So building a school, hospital, infrastructures, that's more focus from the Japanese ODAs, development aid, for reconstruction. And many Japanese NGOs also working post-conflict trauma healing, of course, the development using ODAs also. So mainly post-conflict peace building phase. Of course, many Japanese NGOs working humanitarian aid during the conflict time. But we are not really touching the political solution for the conflict. So we are more focusing on the post-conflict peace building, but not whole the range of peace building.
What about with peace building and peace mediation? How are those two distinct from each other?
Peace building itself is a very broad idea, but the peace mediation phase is during the peacemaking phase. So still there is a conflict, violent conflict. Then the third party come in and try to solve this problem. That is the peacemaking phase. So peace mediation, the third party come in and being the mediator or facilitator to solve the problem, bringing two or three conflicting parties, and then bringing the peace dialogue table and negotiate and try to compromise each other, then lead to the agreement, peace agreement. That phase is very political, but this is really important effort to do. I also wanted to add one more thing, that the mediation and mediation support. If there is already mediator and then peace process started, but someone supporting this peace process going forward. So that is we can call mediation support. Even behind the scene, we can do some kind of collaboration to promote peace process. So that's why peace mediation and peace mediation support is slightly different.
Can you think of any specific examples of the Japanese government doing these kind of activities?
Yes, Japan, actually we also had some experience doing peace mediation or peace mediation support. For example, like long time ago, but in Cambodia, Japanese government actually doing a lot of mediation support role in Cambodia. Also in Indonesia, Aceh, Koha process, 2001 to 2003. Also the Sri Lanka, also we are involving for peace process, peace dialogue. And our big success is in Philippine Mindanao. Japanese government is become the international contact group as a observer status, and then supporting the peace process, promoting peace process itself. So Japan also has some experience working peace-making phase for the mediation support, but not really emphasize and more focusing on the development.
Do you see that there are any expectations that potentially the international community has of Japan in this area, or how does Japan fit into the larger international picture?
We are kind of seeing as a very neutral actors because we are not Muslim, we are not Christian, we are not Jew. So if related religious conflict, related to the religion is the conflict issue, then Japan maybe can be a neutral third party, and we can discuss for many peoples, whoever that kind of still have a strong stereotype towards other religion. Japan is free to be, the free position from them. Then also Japan, because of the Japanese government ODA support for a long time and development aid, So there are a lot of trust with the other countries, especially developing countries. So what Japan, after the conflict, World War II, for 80 years, we are working a lot for the development aid. Through those support, Japan developed a lot of trust with the other countries. That's why there are so many conflict areas. Some of the actors asking Japan to come to be a mediator. But because of the Japanese government, also many of the Japanese NGO, a little bit hesitate to involve because this is very politically sensitive. But I think it is also very important, and there are a lot of space that Japan can play some role to contribute peace and stability.
You talk about Japan being kind of called upon as this neutral party in the post-World War II international order. But I think we're at a point in time where that international order is changing and international institutions are changing and evolving. So what do you see as the challenges and where further action is necessary, either by Japan or other parties as well?
After the World War II, human beings actually learn a lot from the tragedy that we need to protect the human rights. We also have to have a more rule of law, democracy. So those kind of value is developed for the 80 years. Because of we had bad tragedy and lesson learned from the World War II, I think. But right now, many of the big powers start to forget about it. So Japan, through the development aid, not the mediation, but through the development aid, Japan tried to promote peace in the world and stability. So Japan, right now, because of the disappearing those important value in this world, so Japan can play important role to strengthen again those important values with the other countries, like-minded countries. So it is really a difficult moment, challenging time in the world, but Japan have to play more proactive role for peace and stability in the world. And maybe Japan can play that kind of role through not only development aid, but through peacekeeping. It means that peace mediation support.
So there's an important role also for private organizations in this discussion. So we've been talking about the Japanese government and efforts that have happened on that end. But what do you see as the role for other organizations in this process?
Yes, actually peace mediation and peace mediation support is very politically sensitive because some of the countries who had a self-determination conflict, they don't want to internationalize those issues. Because of this is our internal affairs, so they don't want that international organization or other government come in and do something. So there are a lot of limitations that government come in and do some activity, or international organization like UN come in to do some peace mediation activities within the countries. But if private organization is much easier to come in, and private organization can make a lot of network or trust-building activity with the all conflicting parties, then we can find some opportunity to bring those two parties and sit down on the table, dialogue table, and then find some solution. We can also say that to all those actors that there are a lot of ways to solve the problem, not using the violence. So we can try to convince them to sit down together and discuss for the future. But those kind of initiative is sometimes difficult, done by government or UN agencies. So there are a lot of role for the private organization can play.
So I want to turn our attention to the Center for Mediation Support, which was established within the Sasakawa Peace Foundation on April 1st of this year. So first, can you tell us what are the central goals that are guiding the work of the center?
Japanese government and then Japanese private organization didn't focus peacemaking phase. So we didn't do so much on peace mediation and mediation support. But as I told you that actually Japan can play a much bigger role for this phase. The Sasakawa Peace Foundation, also the Nippon Foundation, working peace mediation support actually in Southeast Asia mainly for a long time. So we can establish this center and we can do more this kind of activity to other countries. That's why we can use this experience to share to other countries. Then maybe we can play more role for making peace and stability. Not only just Southeast Asia, but other regions too.
What are some of the regions that will be covered by the work of this center?
We are now thinking that we are more focusing on Southeast Asia, but we wanted to work for whole Asia. But what does it mean, Asia? Usually in the world, we say Middle East, but this is a still very colonial perspective. Maybe from London, Paris, see the Middle East. But from Japan, we see Middle East is actually West. So now we wanted to have a concept of the more bigger idea of the Asia. So we want to call as West Asia. So we are saying that Asia is from East until West. All are, we call Asia. Those regions in West Asia, that's also the center wanted to try do some activities.
I'm hoping you can talk a bit about what exactly those activities would be. So the center will be focusing on mediation support, or will be focusing on peace mediation support. So what exactly does that mean in this case?
So for example, what we are doing in Southeast Asia, especially working on the Deep South Thailand conflict, so we are promoting peace process. Currently, Malaysia as the facilitator, and Thai government, and then the armed group called BRN is talking for the peace dialogue, facilitated by the Malaysian government. But sometimes stuck all those peace process itself. So we, as a Japanese private organization, we are working already more than 15 years in those areas. So we have a lot of contact and we have a lot of trust building with the armed group and then Thai government and Malaysian government too. So as the Japanese private organization, we can support from the behind the scene, we can support this peace process. That's kind of activity we call peace mediation support. We can do not only just the Deep South, but in other area too. For example, Libya, it is very far from Japan, but because of we are not really involving and we don't have any interest in Libya, that's why as a third party, we can do some activities in promoting peace and stability in that region. We are still discussing what we can do, but we wanted to engage with all those actors because we need to understand what actually all actors thinking. Usually current situation, for example, Trump, he claimed himself as a mediator, but what he's doing is more deal or transactional deal. It's not a peace mediation or not a conflict resolution actually. This is more interest-based activities. To solve the problem, solve the conflict, it's really important to touch the cause of the conflict. So it means that we need to understand what is the conflicting actor think. So that's why we need to engage with all actors and what they are actually thinking. It is very important to understand. That is the first basic activity, to understand what they are thinking and to have some good relationship and trust building with all actors. That is a starting point. Then we can start to think together what is the future. But right now, there are so much mediator, like Trump, they didn't touch the real cause of the conflict, only just the surface. that only stop the violence for a while. But it means that reoccur again the violence if we don't really touch the cause of the conflict. And this is sometimes very long process. And then that is the more structural causes of the conflict is everywhere. So we cannot solve all the problem, but still we need to talk about it if we want to see the future. And another interesting thing is many of the mediation support actors is doing lesson learned or sharing the experience. Each conflict is very unique, but at the same time, we can learn from other conflicts too. So that's why it is also very important to have more networking and then collaboration with many actors. And the Center for Mediation Support at the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, we want to focus also become the hub of the area studies scholars. In Japan, there are so many scholars or researchers who can speak foreign language, and they know what's really happening in those countries, politically and economically and socially, many perspectives. But Japanese government and Japanese organization don't use those knowledge so much. So maybe this Center for Mediation Support can be the hub of these all area studies, come together and we analyze together about the conflict. And then we want to utilize their network, their knowledge, their experience for peace.
I also want to hear a bit about your story and how you got involved in this field in the first place. So I wanted to know, why did you become interested in the field of peace building?
Yes, because actually it is from the high school student.
Oh, really?
At that time, it was a Yugoslavian conflict there. So many people say that ethnic cleansing or religious war, so fighting Muslim, Christians. So I thought that when I was high school, I saw those conflicts and study a little bit. And I thought that, well, I'm not a Christian, I'm not a Muslim, so maybe I can be the mediator to bring both people to talk and to solve some problem. So I thought that Japan can be the connector. Japan can be the kind of mediator role for making peace. That is already when I was a high school student.
So young, at such a young age.
I was kind of got some inspiration that maybe Japan can play that kind of role. So since then, I thought that, well, we don't have a kind of religion, institutional religion, but it's important to understand what is their belief. That's why I started to study about theology first. And then I started to study about the area studies. Especially I study in Italy, America, so I went to Europe and America, so I thought that it is good to study about Asia. So I picked Indonesia as a case study, but especially they call religious conflict in Indonesia. Then I started to do some my PhD field work in Ambon in Indonesia, east part of Indonesia. There are some Christian versus Muslim communal conflict happen since 1999. So I started to live with the Christian community and the Muslim community as a homestay. But because I'm Japanese and they don't know what is my religion, that's why Muslim community also welcome me to stay and Christian community also. So that is a kind of like a real experience, that concrete experience that Japan can really accept it, both communities in the first stage. Of course, if it takes a long time, whoever can make a trust with both parties. But Japan, very easy in the first stage, we can go and talk with anyone. After that, I also start to work in Poso, Indonesia, also Aceh, and start to work in southern Thailand. Because I can also speak Malay language, as a Japanese, in Southeast Asia countries, they really easy to accept me to talk what they actually think. In this sense, I think that from my real experience, maybe Japanese can play many role for peacemaking and especially peace mediation support, because it's very political sensitive. But if we analyze properly the conflict and then actor mapping and networking, then we can have more access to anyone in the region, conflicting parties, and can hear their stories. Then can maybe bring some peace in the region. That is my experience and then my idea. That's why I start to work on these issues.
What would you say is your vision for the field of peacebuilding moving forward based on your experience on the ground?
This world is really having a lot of conflict all over the world. And then I think because of the many countries is focusing only military expense is increasing and the more military protection in all countries, then they forget about what happened outside, and still there are so many people are suffering. But still Japan maybe can play some role and then can support some of those who are suffering. And that is a more Japan's soft power. And Japan can do more activity for peace. Then as a private foundation, we can play more proactive role in this field. Then even this very challenging situation in the world, but somehow we can bring some hope. And wanted to collaborate with all like-minded country and organization together to promote those activities. So even small step, but I think it is very important to initiate this kind of activities.
That was our conversation with Dr. Akiko Horiba, Director of the Center for Mediation Support. To learn more about the center, head over to the show notes or visit the SPF website. Thanks for joining us for this episode of SPF World Views. We'll see you next time.